she said, we're going to talk about usability testing, but specifically, I want to break it down into some steps that make it a little less complicated, a little cheaper, a little easier to do. As she said, Bekah Rice. I work for TrueMatter. We're a usability consultancy that does user testing, research, full design, development, you name it. We're out of Columbia, South Carolina, so I've come a long way. I'm from the land of humidity. This is very weird for me. But we're going to be talking about usability testing with no time and no budget. That is the typical scenario we all find ourselves in when you're not at a usability consultancy where people actually pay us to do this. In an ideal world, we're testing all our products every time we put something out there in the world. This is not an ideal world. We know that. So we want to make sure that before anything goes out the door, we at least have some insights into the assumptions we've made. Are they right? Are they wrong? We don't want to build a full product to find out that we were wrong. So the best thing we can do is to make sure we're testing throughout our build and after the fact to make sure that we're improving on our product in the long run. So I've broken it down into 8 steps. Any good DIY anything should have steps, in my opinion. And we're going to look into each of these and then do a user test. If at any point you have any questions, I want you to kind of save them because I will save time for that at the end. And I want some good ones, so if you're napping, I'll know. First step, we have to build something. I know that seems really obvious, but you want to have ideally a high-fidelity wireframe, or it can be even a prototype that you've actually coded. But ideally, I'm saying, we don't want to have to test with the final product because the whole point is to do that before we build everything and then find out we're wrong. So if we have something we can test with, that's the first step, probably the easiest part of this, to be honest. You want to make sure that it is as real for the user as possible. If it's not, they're not going to do anything real. They're going to act as if they're being watched, which they are. So you want to make sure that they get all of the context. So you don't want to test any components or pages that are isolated or siloed off from the rest of the product. And you want to make sure that they can mess up, and they will mess up. That's one of the ways that we learn. So again, if we don't have that full context, or at least the majority of it for the tasks that we're presenting to them, we're not going to get as much information. Today, we'll actually be testing a hospital site, regional hospital. It's 12 years old, so it's really overdue for redesign, and my company is currently doing this. So we'll also look at a very early prototype that we've put together, and we're going to test both just to see what our user does or doesn't do. Second step is actually a little bit harder, and this is the one we'll go in a little more in depth with, is we have to have some actual tasks for the user to do. The whole point of user testing is that we're asking a real person to do things they would normally do with our product and find out, can they do it? If they were able to do it, was it hard? Was it easy? Where did they stumble? And make note of that. So having a very succinct list of things to test is really important and something that requires a lot of planning before you go into testing. You want to make sure that these are things these people are actually going to do. So we'll talk about how we recruit users, and that kind of falls in line with that. But we don't want to ask them to do anything that you wouldn't actually use the product for. That's kind of a no-brainer. But making sure that, again, it's got the full context of what they would actually be doing and they can complete that task. You want to make sure each task is a question. So one of the things that you'll see in a little bit is I'm going to have the user read the task aloud before they begin. This is important so they actually remember what they're doing and don't forget in the middle of the test, because that can be really awkward. But it also makes them really think about it. So we'll talk about how we design that. The list should be short. So ideally, you want to have 10 tasks that are prioritized from most important to least important. The reason for that is a lot of users won't get to the end. They're going to take a lot longer than you expect them to. They might actually do things really fast, and then you're awkwardly just hanging out with them for another 30 minutes. You also don't want to overload them with too many things. So we don't want to keep someone for an hour, especially when we're not paying them, which we'll get into. So you want to make sure that you stick to those 10. You can do fewer. You can maybe do more, but I wouldn't recommend it. I would actually do a whole other testing session in that situation. So this is the scenario that we're going to test today. And there are a few things that I'll point out here about designing a good task. The first thing is that we are giving them some context as to what's going on. So obviously, if I read this and I hadn't been told I'd moved, I'd be like, I don't need a new doctor, I have one. And users will say things like that. So you want to set them up to kind of imagine that they're actually in this situation. It doesn't need to be elaborate. We don't want to create a whole world for them. We just want to give them some context as to why they're doing the task. We're then going to tell them that they need a specific kind of doctor without telling them what type of doctor. So in this scenario, we don't want to use the words that are on the website because they're immediately going to find them. That's kind of the easiest thing for them to do. So we won't learn a lot if that happens. We also want to tell them how to do it. So one of the worst things that can happen is you give them the scenario without telling them to go to that website, and they'll go to Google, which that's insight. It is helpful to see how someone really would find this. They might be like, I'll call a friend, I'm going to Google it, and then use some other site, not the one you want me to find this information. So by specifying, again, more context, that'll make sure that they're kind of fully prepared. I'm going to be on this site. I just moved here, need a doctor. So these can be longer or shorter. That really doesn't matter. You do have to keep in mind they're going to read it aloud. So if you're pressed for time, I wouldn't recommend something super long. But you also want to make sure you're not leading them in any way. So a good example is if you're doing a bill pay site, like a utility company. You wouldn't want to tell them, go pay your bill on the My Account page. That's telling them exactly what to do. You would just say, go pay your bill, and find out how they would go about it. That's how we learn. Next part is finding people. This can be a little tricky, but in an ideal situation, again, we're not there, but just in case, we'd probably use some recruiting firm. We'd have a list of criteria. These users would be well vetted to fit the type of product that we're testing, but since we're not doing that here, we want to make sure that we don't have to pay them, that we don't have to hire a firm to find them. So who do we ask? We don't ask people we're working with. We don't ask developers. Developers are horrible users for a user test unless you're testing a product that is for developers. That is the only time I would ever recommend that. You do not want stakeholders. You don't want anyone that has an opinion or domain knowledge of your product because they're already going to come in wanting specific things, thinking specific things about it. You also want to make sure, depending on the product, you don't have any digital power users. So that's people that know keyboard shortcuts for a browser, not for their specific product. I will say there is a caveat to this. If you are designing something for internal users, so if you're at a company, you're designing a company-specific product that people are using day in, day out, fine to test with them. Those are the real users in that scenario. So even if they're power users, even if they're people that know about the product or the previous iteration of it, you still want to test with them because at the end of the day, they're going to be the ones using this day in, day out. The people you do want to find, so those are people we want to avoid, anyone that doesn't work in your department or anything to do with the product. So if this isn't something, like I said, that's specific internal use, it's a public-facing thing maybe, you could go find someone that works in accounting, or someone that works maybe if you've got a food situation in your office that does that. Something completely unrelated to your job in this case. You also want to make sure they would use your product. So you don't want to ask someone, go pay your bill online, and I don't do that. I call it in, kind of thing. And people that aren't super tech savvy. This one's again with a caveat. It depends on who's going to actually use your product. So if it is for someone, developers specifically, let's say for example, you want to make sure that you're recruiting them. So otherwise, though, I would say, me personally, my mom is a go-to because she's in her late 50s. She doesn't use technology as much as maybe I do, but she's not completely tech illiterate. So I can have her do something like go pay the utility bill because that's something she has to do on a day-to-day basis. Family members, friends, great to look into. You want to make sure, again, depending on the product, if you can vary the ages of the people you're testing with, that's great. Ethnicity, background, so different. Maybe you have some students, maybe you have some full-time employed folks. It just depends on what the product is. If they wouldn't use it in the real world, don't test with them. Food, great motivator. So for incentives, I recommend free lunch. A coffee goes a long way, as do favors if you're asking someone within your company, always a good too. And then making sure you have 5 users. The Nielsen-Norman Group has a great article about this specifically. They found that after 5 users, you've seen enough patterns that you really don't need to go any further. We have done tests with more than 5 users if we're doing a quantitative test, where the goal is to see that pattern repeated over and over. But for qualitative testing, what we're talking about today, we want to make sure we're not going too far over 5 because then we're wasting our resources. This is Adam. He will be testing with us today. He's my husband, not gonna lie. So he may be flirty. That can also be expected in some user tests. They can also show up drunk. This has happened. But he uses an iPhone, so we will test with an iPhone today. And he is not a tech person, so great for testing a hospital website because he is a human being, and those people need hospitals too. So fourth step, we're halfway there. We're doing okay? It's a lot so far, but it's simple, right? A space. So we're here today, not the ideal space. You want to make sure that you're kind of, as much as you can, recreating the space where the user would actually be doing the thing you're asking them to do. So I keep coming back to the utility billing because it's just kind of an easy one. If they pay, if they pay their bills on their home computer, at the couch, set up something like that. Find a space within your office. You can even go to a coffee shop as long as they don't like kick you out for loitering, and just sit them down with something they're used to using. So if they use a laptop or a desktop, try to provide one. Your own phone will work in a pinch. We'll get into that in a minute. But just making sure that they feel comfortable, that it seems very realistic. The more realistic it feels for them, the more real they will be during the test, and we'll get the best kind of information from that. We're here. We're going to do the test here. Not ideal. You never want this many people watching the user. They will feel very weird. So hopefully he'll be all right. As far as equipment goes, there are a lot of things that can kind of fluctuate with this. It really depends on what your end goal is with the test and how you're going to report your findings. Ideally, like I said, you want to make sure that they're comfortable, that they're in the situation that they would be doing the real task. So if that's in their house, you know, sometimes I brought in a plant or a box of tissues and a lamp, something to make it not feel like my very sterile like office space. A mouse is really great, especially if you have older users who use a mouse every day and aren't used to a trackpad or something with a laptop. You want to make sure, again, that they have a desktop setup if that's what they're going to use this on, or a phone if that's what they would use it on. I am using my own phone today, and we've done that in actually a lot of tests. It's a bit awkward if you don't mute your notifications, but it works in a pinch. And then ideally, you want to record your sessions. Here it's really important, especially if you have stakeholders that have strong opinions about how users will do a thing, and you want to show them exactly what the users do. A recording is probably the most powerful tool for that. Watching someone stumble through a task that should be easy, or that this is the way we've always done it and it's been fine, is really the only argument you need when trying to advocate for improvements to your product. So that can be really great. Zoom works for that. That's probably the cheapest, easiest way. That also allows you to have stakeholders watching while you're doing the test, and the user has no idea. So you can kind of put it in the background. One that I use is called Look Back. It's a really great tool that I've found for remote testing, which is not something I highly recommend for this type of test. I think that's better for quantitative testing because you can get more users that way and run through scenarios a lot quicker. In person for this type of thing would be best, and if you record it with Look Back, again, you can have people watch. You can also share and add notes. Really cool thing. Adam's phone. It's actually mine. His is broken. So we're going to test on that. Step 5, a little crowd participation might be needed for this. You need someone to help you. It is very difficult to administer a test, so to be there sitting with the user, not answering their questions, which we'll get into, and also trying to guide them through the tasks without actually telling them anything, and take notes, which notes are obviously very important here. That's where we record our insights and the patterns that we're seeing. So the people you might ask to do this, anyone involved in the project. So this is the opposite of the people you would test with. So if you have someone that's a developer, designer, anyone working with you, and they can take okay notes and observe well without talking, they're perfect. That's another easy one. If anyone would like to take notes during this session, you may. I will not ask for them after, but you're all note takers today since you'll be watching. Almost done. Time. So this is probably one of the hardest parts because we're talking about doing something when we're really busy. We're all very busy. So for this type of test, the steps that I've gone through, these will work in about a half-day session. So you could prep in the morning, do this in the afternoon, assuming you had users on hand and didn't have to schedule them. So it really doesn't require a lot of time up front. It might take time after to do the reporting side, but that's really, at the end of the day, up to you. So for this, we're having 5 users. We're going to have them do their 5 tests, so each user. For 45 minutes, if you have less than 10 scenarios, you could probably get away with like 30 minutes. But I always go with 45 just to be safe. Sometimes people take longer than you expect, or they rush through it, and then you get a little break. 15 minutes is really good between each test because you'll have people that show up late or show up really early. You also have to reset. So if you're using a prototype, that means putting back everything to its original state. This can mean setting up the room again because people will just move stuff around. So you want to have that time to be able to make it nice. When you're actually doing the test. So this is probably the biggest one, and it doesn't seem like it would be. But people are going to be coming in from who knows what. They might be in the middle of a task at work if you recruited someone you work with. They might have been like dropping their kids off at school. We don't know how they're coming into the scenario, but we need them to be able to focus, but also feel comfortable. And that can be really hard in user testing, especially when they know someone's watching them. So we always start out with a practice task. We have several like kids books that we use for this. My favorite is Where's the Poop? It's like a pop-up book with little things you lift. So you explain to the user, okay, we're going to practice narrating our thoughts because during the test, I'm going to want you to tell me what you're thinking while you're doing it, maybe even say what you're doing, just to clarify in case I don't understand watching. And I want you to do that right now. So you would hand them the book, and usually I'll say, like, find the poop, because that's really good in this book. It depends on the book. And you'll have them just flip through and do it. A lot of times they won't talk at the beginning, and I'll give some examples of how I deal with that. But ultimately, because it's a funny book, do recommend that, they get really comfortable with you because they're doing something silly. And anytime we do something silly, that's just kind of breaks the ice. Make sure that they know that you are testing the product and not them. I cannot emphasize this enough because, again, people are going to feel uncomfortable. They're being watched. Someone's taking notes, and it's called a user test. So naturally, they think, I'm the user, I'm being tested. We don't want them to feel that way. So make sure that you tell them that they can't do anything wrong, because if they do something that is wrong or they can't complete the task is what we actually mean, that's the product's failing and not theirs. So we try to reiterate that at the very beginning and throughout the test, anytime that they seem frustrated, to let them know that this is not on them. Sometimes I'm like, this is my fault. I built that. My bad. And that makes them feel a lot more comfortable and just they do things a lot more naturally, which is what we want. You also can't talk. So you can respond to questions. I'll give some examples of that. But this is the hardest part, I think, for a lot of people, especially if you're testing your own product that you built. Watching someone rip apart something you did while you're sitting next to them and you're like smiling is not the most fun. But if you say anything, you obviously are going to disrupt the test, but also impact what they might say later. So we don't want to do that. We also don't want to answer their questions because they're going to ask you, should I click this? They're going to legit be like, okay, I'm just going to do this, right? And they'll just stare at you. They'll just awkwardly sit there and wait for you to tell them what to do, and you can't do that. This is science. It's very important that we don't show any emotions during the test. We don't respond directly to their questions with an answer, but we also don't want to piss them off. So how do we do that? You always, if you can, and sometimes this does make them mad, try to start with a question first. So my favorite ones are, is this what you expected? What did you think it would do? Things that kind of make them come up with the answer, which gives you a lot of insights, because if they're sitting there like, should I click this? And you ask, is that what you would expect to do? They will then explain to you why it's not or why it is, which gives us more information. Another one I'll do if my prototype breaks. That happens all the time. I can say something like, for the purposes of this test, that page is not working. Or for the purposes of this test, you are trying to pay your late bill. Because sometimes if we're presenting them a scenario, and again, they didn't get that context at the beginning where we said, you need a new doctor, they'll be like, oh, no, I have a doctor. His name's no. You have to then put them back in that context. So you can say, for the purposes of this test, you are actually looking for a new doctor because you just moved. So you just reiterate why they're there and add that it's a test, and they kind of let it go. At the end of every task, this is always awkward, they'll tell you they're done sometimes. And usually they're not. Usually that's when they've found a completely different route than the one you wanted them to take. And so that can be kind of sad, but science, we deal with it. Then other times they'll ask you, like, what do I do next? Or they'll just kind of get confused and they'll just keep going past that 45-minute window. So if you feel like they've gotten stuck or they're getting frustrated, you can just ask them, do you feel like you've completed the task? We do sometimes at the beginning of the test also tell them, when you've completed the task, tell me that you are done. Just again, so we don't have those awkward periods where people are just standing there like looking at you. Silence is another very common thing, so people aren't used to narrating their thoughts, or at least most normal people. So we have to remind them throughout the test that they need to do that without guiding them or influencing the test. So what are you thinking right now is a great one because they're thinking something. What are the words you're looking for? I try not to say what are you looking for, but that sometimes happens if I don't want to imply that there are specific words on the page they should be looking for, because again, that's kind of a leading question. But telling them, what they're looking for also can make some users feel like it's a test on them. So you do need to be very careful with how you say things. You never want them to feel like they're being rushed or that you're frustrated with them. That's very important. And then how you're feeling right now, that one sometimes doesn't go over well with some folks because they'll just be like, I'm really mad. Why can't I do this? But that's another one. If they're not talking, they're not narrating while they're going through, these are just some ways you can kind of get them back into the test and talking. So last step. This one is the one that makes you look really good with your boss, that makes you, or allows you to do the thing you wanted to do from the beginning that no one believed was the right way to go. Now you're going to have the proof to show them. So the whole reason we do this is to have some kind of findings to either make a report out of, or we can just make a list and add it to the backlog and know that this is what we have to do to the product to make it better. So throughout the test, like I said, after about 5 tests, or with 5 users, you'll see patterns. You'll see places where they all stumbled, or maybe 1 or 2 did, and you can note why. There might have been a difference in their age or their experience with the product. It also could be, just something went wrong with the test. So that's something to make note of. This also is something great if you do a lot of testing, which I recommend. So when you have less users, you can do more smaller tests like this. And once you start seeing those patterns change, that's when you know that this is working. It's when you know that you're actually garnering insights that are leading to a better product because you don't see the same patterns repeated. You want to make sure all the issues that came up obviously are noted. This can be issues with the test itself, with the users. That's good to make sure people know, because if they're watching the recordings, they weren't in the room sitting next to that person. They might not hear everything. They might not understand, the circumstances behind when that user came into the room, like they were drunk. And so it's good to note those things as well. And then you also want to make sure you don't just put this in a report and hand it off. This is something that you discuss. User test findings should always be talked about. They should always be explored further, because we can make assumptions about what we saw in the test just as easily as we make assumptions about our products pre-testing. So it's very important to have a discussion with as many people that were involved, either observing or taking notes or watching on Zoom, to kind of see what they thought was happening. Ideally, the person in the room got it all, and they're going to be like the source of truth in this scenario, but that's not always the case. You're always going to have difficult personalities where they were watching and like, oh, no, they did fine. They got through it, and that's all that matters. But if you were there and you can explain, hey, they got through it, but they were mad the whole time, that goes a long way. These are some examples that probably look very small. I apologize for that, of some reports that we've done. We make them pretty. People do tend to look at them if they look a little better. A Word doc is fine. We've done that too. But if you're going to stakeholders that you have a hard time getting their attention, add some color. This is an example of the actual scenario report. So here we would list out what it was that we were trying to test, what happened, and then the numbers. So who passed, who failed. Pass and fail is a very subjective term, but we do have to use it sometimes to explain that, yes, they completed the task in a successful way, or they did not. Like, they just gave up, because that's where we know that things went really bad. We'll also list out the device ratio, because depending on what device they would use in the wild, we want to make sure that we're accounting for that and that it's very transparent to anyone reading the report. We also do a user breakout. This is another way you can report on this, where you talk about each user, you give context about who they are, what specific things they might have done that were of interest, and then if they passed or failed the tests. And then this is kind of more of a high-level thing where we talk about themes. So you can talk about a scenario if it passed or failed. But I find it's actually more useful to look at overall themes. So all of the forms that they interacted with were bad is a theme, or they didn't do so well with it. That would be one place to focus. Or in this example, if the pages didn't look different when they went from one to the other, or they missed the page change, which can happen, we all know with Angular, sometimes not refreshing. People don't see a change on the page very easily, so they just completely ignore it. Themes like this are really important because they allow us to set up things, especially if we're working in an agile environment, set up some features and things that we know we need to work on, and then have all of these insights that kind of tie back to that and give us the why for what we're doing. 8 steps. That was all of them. I will also be sharing this, but I think that the biggest takeaway from this is that you should test, and that it's actually not that hard. You just have to find some good friends and have some hopefully free equipment. But any kind of testing that you can do with someone that isn't just a stakeholder or another developer is going to help you learn something about the product at the end of the day. I've never done a test where I walked away and I was like, well, that wasn't worth it. They always teach you something. So we're going to try one now. This is a list of a bunch of other articles that are about user testing that we published if you want to check that out. I'm going to go ahead and get Adam and switch to the phone. You're going to see him using this. He's back there so he can't hear. But he probably heard that. Adam. You can clap for him if you want. Okay. So I'm going to have the phone up so you'll be able to see that. But you won't be able to see his face. I do recommend when recording this that you have both. I think that that's really helpful because just seeing someone do something and hearing their voice is not quite the same as seeing their face. A lot of what we communicate is with our expressions and our mannerisms, so that can be really helpful. Hopefully you can kind of see it from up here. All right. So if this was real, it's kind of real. He is a person that is here to test. I would tell him when he came in that today we're going to have you do a series of tasks to test a product to see that if you can complete those tasks or not. You are not being tested, the product is. You can't do anything wrong in this scenario. If you feel you have completed a task, I would like you to tell me, I'm done.
Okay.
I would then do the icebreaker thing with the book, but to save time, we won't do that. He found the poop, we'll pretend. So I'm going to have him read the scenario that is printed on this lovely paper and not the hotel stationery because I did not forget my printouts. Please read that aloud.
You've, meaning I, have moved to a new town and need a new doctor for regular care and yearly physicals. Use lexmed.com to make an appointment.
Here you go.
And this is lexmed.com.
Yes.
All right.
That's a question you can answer.
So
what are you thinking right now?
I'm looking for like a make an appointment button or something like that. Kind of wondering if I need to make an account, something like that. Oh, find a doctor. I think that would probably do it. I think I'm going to go ahead and click find a doctor. All right.
Freeze. I'm going to narrate some of these things to show you the insights that I'm noticing. So he clicked on the top search area without reading the placeholder text. That is super common user behavior. Never rely on the placeholder text. He saw a search area, thought, I'm finding a doctor, and went for it. Unfreeze.
Okay. So I think I need like a general practitioner, so I'm going to try that out here. Oh, these are names. Okay, we won't do that. Specialties, there we go. Kind of, general surgery is not what I want. General is the word I was looking for, though.
Freeze. So here we learned that he is looking for the word general. That is something that we would note in the report because we might want to think about the wording of these different specialties. So we would poll a lot of users in that situation. That would be a good opportunity to do a quantitative report to find out what words people are most often looking for. Continue. You did.
I was trying to get ahead of you, sorry. I see the word all. That's hopeful. Primary care. It sounds like somebody paraphrased general practitioner. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And then we got to worry about locations. So I kind of want to find one near my home. But some of this is a little confusing. I live in Northeast, but not Northeast Lexington. Might not click that.
Freeze. So here would be another insight where we would learn that the way we internally think about locations makes no sense to the user. If they're looking for where they are regionally, we shouldn't just name our buildings after our internal use. Continue.
Okay. I'm going to try the main campus one just because I do know where that is. I pass it every now and then. Primary care. I'm going to go with a guy because I'm married and I don't want her to feel weird. But she did warn you that they might flirt or make a weird joke, right? Okay. Yeah, I think that's enough information in the stuff, so I'm going to just click find and see what I get. 0 doctors found. All right. We'll go with either. Try that again. 0 doctors found. Let's change campus. Let's try that one. 0 doctors found.
Freeze. You would not say anything. They can do so many combinations, and you're just going to sit there, and you're going to let them do it. Unfreeze. You're not unfreeze.
1 doctor found. All right. I don't want to re-click find a doctor. I guess I'll click on the man. Yeah, I'll click on the doc.
What are you thinking right now?
I'm looking for well, I see they have a phone number, and I'm trying to resist the urge just to call it because that would be like slightly easier than continuing to go through this.
Freeze. That's a big insight. There are a lot of people that will end the test that way. If they can't find a solution to the problem you presented them with, they'll be like, I'll just call someone. They sometimes won't even pick up the device to complete the test because that's just their go-to. That is still a successful user test because that tells us that this person is always going to want to find a phone number, so we're going to make that easy. Keep going. What are you thinking now?
I was looking for a make an appointment button or a sign up button of some kind. I'm hoping I'm not just overlooking it, but I might have been. Yeah, I'm a little stuck. I do have a phone number here. Maybe I could just call them. But other than that, I'm not seeing a clear way to make an appointment. I don't think. I might, at this point, click back and see if that was on the previous thing or if I need to enter this guy's name into that search bar at the top.
Freeze. Here's where I'd let him do that. And he would do that for the whole 45 minutes of the test, probably. And you would sit there and let him do that. I also might ask him, do you feel like you've completed the task? Sometimes they'll just say yes if they can't figure out a way forward. Another insight you'll notice is there is a way to make an appointment. It's just horribly designed. The word appointments is in a sentence. The main action button is logging into a system with a name that is horrible because unless you're already in this hospital system, you don't know what MyChart is. So these are all things we have factored in to this very makeshift prototype that we're going to try now that I made in Acture, which is our favorite tool because you can do prototyping with a lot of logic and interaction. So you can build something out fairly quickly that you can then put in front of a user. Usually they're not very pretty, but a lot of times users will only comment on the design if it's like worth commenting on, if it looks nice. They're typically not going to be like, this is ugly, when it's very sparse and prototypey. They might, but they'll get over it real quick and just keep trying. So this is a very rough prototype. We're going to pretend, again, for the sake of time, and I want to make sure y'all can ask questions, that he either got here through Google, which probably would have been very likely, or he found this on the new Finding Care page that we would have with a big search bar. I don't have prototypes for that, so we're going to try this.
Neat.
They would never say that. What are you doing right now?
I'm going to select adults because I'm neither a family, a woman, or a child. So adult internal medicine, though, is not all. Okay. Doctor's gender is male. That's fine. And okay, so it's got one here. And I'm making an appointment button, which I like because that's what I was supposed to be doing. So I'll click that guy.
And it would do something. For the purposes of this test, you've made your appointment. That's how I'd probably wrap that up if I hadn't built out the rest of the prototype. So that was just to show you how quick you could put together a test. This is literally something I told him we'd be doing today. So I would now like to take time for questions, or if you have any specific thoughts on, oh, thank you. You can go. Or any specific thoughts on designing scenarios or any problems that you've run into while trying to do user testing, and just offer any insights I have. As far as the workshop goes, we can't do user testing with each other, as I already explained. So raise your hand if you have a question, or just say it. Go ahead. I ask myself that in every test, but then I also remember that I'm a human too, and I do just as many stupid things. But it's very humbling to watch someone try to do something and fail when it looks very easy to you, and then also have things like that happen to you on a daily basis, which I'm sure we've all been there. How many times has a typo taken 4 hours of your time in your code to figure out it was just a typo, and then you feel really dumb? But yeah. Yeah, that's good. So he asked about if you have a flow and someone gets stuck at the very beginning, do you waste the whole 45 minutes and let them keep going, or do you move on to something else? That happens about 50% of the time, and usually we just let them go. And the reason for that is even if they don't complete the task, you're still watching someone use your product. At the end of the day, even if you don't give them a task, that is the valuable part of user testing, is watching a real person try to do anything at all with a product. So it's frustrating to sit there and know that, like, well, this is obvious garbage because they failed. They failed badly at the very beginning, but we can still get information from it, so it's not a complete lose situation. Yep. That's a great question. He asked, how do we test or monitor accessibility instead of just user testing? So you can do user testing that is accessibility specific. I have done this on accident. We haven't actually had any of our clients ask about that, unfortunately, because it is still not as commonplace. But we had a user that had recently had a stroke, and the recruiter didn't know this, we didn't know this, and she had trouble speaking. So she knew what she wanted to say, she could not articulate it. Thankfully, being an accessibility person and someone with family members that have had a stroke, we still did the test. And it was probably one of the most valuable test scenarios that I've ever been in, because seeing someone try to narrate their thoughts and how they're thinking when they can't articulate it is, in my opinion, very invaluable. User testing, though, or testing in general when it comes to accessibility, I always prefer that it be manual. So if I'm testing specifically a product, I'm going to use the tools that someone with specific disabilities would use. So I have a tap device, I have a screen reader, and I use them in the scenario they would, because I, thankfully, am not blind. But I know that if someone is using a screen reader that has low vision, they might be super zoomed in, super zoomed out. Sometimes I blur my screen. Most of the time, I just turn it off altogether, and that's a great use case. If you can test with users that actually have a disability, that is great, but it is a lot harder to set up, and I don't know if I'd recommend the DIY approach unless they're like a very good friend and very patient with you. Go ahead. So he asked, can you repeat the second part? I didn't quite. Yeah. So he asked about resistance to testing a full product and how far you'd get into the process of building something before you'd start doing usability testing. It is very hard, especially if it's a product that's for internal users. So if you're at your company, the tools you use to do your job are always the cobbler's children. Like they never get the shoes. They most likely won't. Usually there, we're advocating for the efficiency gains. And thankfully, where I work, we have a lot of research on how that plays out with user testing and small improvements you can make. But that is probably the biggest hurdle to cross, is an existing product that someone thinks, the stakeholders think, is good. The best thing to do is to do a test yourself. Because even if it's a little extra time in your day and it's effort, you're going to have proof. You're going to have actual evidence that you can present to them and show, hey, look, I did this with complete strangers. I've documented it all. They failed. They couldn't do these things. Or look how inefficient they were, or the workaround. That's a thing. Seeing the workarounds people have created to deal with a difficult system, the little Post-it notes that they have all around their monitor that say all these little things that they have to remember to do, that is invaluable. And when you can present that to a stakeholder and say, we can eliminate this with X, Y, Z. So in that case, present some solutions, because people don't want to hear about a problem unless you have a solution if they're one of those personalities. I recommend testing at the wireframing phase if that's something you do. So that would be kind of the early design phase where we're just putting something up there. It can be a sketch. We do sketching in Miro, which is an online whiteboarding tool. And we'll just draw some boxes, put some labels on it, and show it to a user or a stakeholder and be like, is this what you meant? So we can start there, and showing that to the real people that will use it, you can get information at that level. So it's really up to you, but I recommend as early as possible, because that seems to prevent the most hurt later. Go ahead. Yeah, that's a good question. So he asked how you deal with, basically you report your findings and they're like, no, that's not right, or they're used to a certain pattern. This happens in redesigns. So let's say you've always done something this way. We know that when we redo that product and we present it to users, their initial reaction is most likely not going to be positive, because you're telling them that the way they've done their job for however many years is now vastly different. You're also probably going to make them sit in a training, and they're going to hate that. And it's going to be slow for a while. Where that happens, you have to show them that over time, it's going to be an improvement. So that's where having kind of some of those metrics around the efficiency gains that you're giving them will give you some wins. It's also really good if you have them involved. So that's another reason why I say start early. If users are part of the process of the redesign, and they're there giving you their insights, telling you what they want, and then you show them, I did it. You win them. You win them over. They have confidence. The other big thing, and this is very hard, I feel like, for us developers, is when you're doing especially like UAT, no bugs. If there are bugs, if there's anything wrong with the system itself, and it's not related to the experience or the design, they will blame the UX person, the designer. They'll blame them first, or really anyone. They want someone to blame. And they'll lose confidence in the product altogether. So that's a really key thing. Anything that seems wrong with the system means all of it's bad. So they have a lot of, and it depends on the user. If it's other tech savvy like developer folks, they'll kind of get it. But if they aren't aware of that and understanding that this is a revolving process and we're going to keep working through things, they'll just write it all off. So that's very tricky and sad, but a reality. Yep, got time for two more. If I was testing it, yes. So that's why I use that one a lot. So in a prototype, things always go wrong. If it's a real product and they do encounter a bug, we'll say for the purposes of this test, this page isn't available. Or for the purpose of the test, let's pretend that what you expected to happen happened. What would that look like? So there, not only am I redirecting them, but I'm finding out like what they ideally would have seen, and that can be really useful. But that happens a lot, unfortunately. In the back. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There is. That's very hard. So we asked, if someone gets out of the test or, lost in it, and it's not because of the UX, it's not because of the flow, it could be something outside or just domain knowledge, which will come up, where you maybe had test data and they're like, oh no, I'm not late on my bill. So that's one with like the utility example is if you try to present them with different things that maybe aren't their reality, they're always going to question it. So you do have to be prepared for that. That's why we give them that context in the task. We also want to stay out of it as much as we can. But things have happened, like sometimes if you have a user that's just not as comfortable with technology, they'll close out an app while you're testing it. That is a case where we would say, okay, for the purpose of this test, I'm going to reset the scenario. We're going to start over. And so I would take the device, I would reset it and hand it to them. But again, I'm not telling them they did anything wrong. I'm just being very general and scientific as much as I can. And that's really all you can do. With the data situation, again, the realer the test is, the realer the prototype or the thing they're testing is, the better, because they will notice all of the inconsistencies. If it's something they use every day, that's their job to notice when things are different or look wrong. So making sure that it doesn't look wrong is really important. But if you're not testing with power users or internal folks, just the general public, I think it's very easy to kind of guide them in a way that's creating a scenario that they can understand and not leading them so much. So, saying something like, you just moved, that's why you need a new doctor, just reassuring them of the thing you've created can kind of help there. But it's always awkward every time that happens. All right, we can do one more, I think. Yes. So we asked if you do a test, you make changes, is it okay to have them come back and test again? Yes, that's totally fine. We've done that a lot, especially if it's an internal product. That's key because, again, we're getting those users involved, so we're already winning them over before we've launched the product. If it's just the general public, you know that they are a user of that thing. And so it's sometimes hard, especially when you're doing it DIY, to find people, to recruit people that you know will be good for the test. So it's totally okay to have them come back. You just have to note that if things haven't changed a lot, and like they've learned the pattern, okay, I go to my account, I click this button, then I do this, that if they do the flow really quickly, it's, we don't call it a bad test, kind of a null test when we note it. So we'll gather any other insights we saw, but if they go through a scenario super fast like that and they're a return tester, we kind of, it didn't count, because that'll happen. But I think we've got a couple more. We good?
Let's see. What time is it?
I guess we have 10 more minutes if y'all have any more questions.
We've got about, let's do 5. So like
Okay.
maybe like 1 or 2 more?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess just as a thought experiment, is there a version of this like in production? Let's say that hospital app that we looked at,
Mm-hmm.
someone might have built that like 10 years ago.
We built it in 2012.
Yeah, maybe it's back then, and then since then we haven't really asked the users like, hey,
Yeah.
do you like this? Is there a version of this where you go and ask people who are actually using it?
There is. I'm glad you asked that. So we asked about, if it's an older thing, you're maybe not doing user testing, or are you doing user testing, I guess, in that scenario? How do you go back to users and find out what they think or how they're using it? So we use, and despite the fact this is a hospital client, which HIPAA is a big deal for us, especially when it comes to analytics, any kind of user behavior tracking, we're very careful. So this might not be an ideal scenario. I'm going to explain for that. But we utilize Crazy Egg. It's a heat map, got all kinds of stuff, screen recording. It is good with privacy. It does mask a lot of things, so you're not totally like creepy and seeing what everybody's doing. But it's really handy because it can give us very quick qualitative or quantitative insights into what people are doing just by seeing, okay, they never click on that call out that's got the big image and looks like an ad. Now we can show the stakeholder, okay, see this heat map? This is from, a year of people coming to the site. No one ever clicked on it. That is always my favorite moment. But also it helps us to notice trends. So we do quarterly reporting with that for a lot of our clients where we'll look and we'll say, hey, this isn't performing well. It's on the homepage. No one's ever clicking on it. We are noticing people are having a hard time finding like the MyChart login. Let's replace this thing on the homepage with this main action, and then let's monitor that. So that's the other big part of it is if you're using something like that, you can monitor every change you make and see how it's progressing. We also recommend all our clients do, at least if they can, yearly user testing. And especially if they have, so most companies have things they want to do and change with their product. The hospital that site's evolved since 2012 in a big way. Lots of things have changed. There's still lots of problems though, because anytime you release something that's taken that much time, you know that there's going to be resistance to big, big changes, like a total redesign. But things that have changed, as we've released them, we've talked to users beforehand, we've done user testing, but we do it very specific to the new change. So in that case, we have the full site, so we can build a prototype that links out to the site. So people that are in the test don't seem to really realize that that's real and this is the thing we're testing, and that can be really helpful. But it is a lot harder if it's not a total redesign to get someone to actually do testing. That's probably the biggest thing that I talk about with clients all the time is, well, if you want to answer that question or find out if it's working, there's a way we can do that. And then we do it, hopefully. But